John Haber, Mike Nash, and two senior individuals from the Alberta Speleological Society had headed to Sovereign George from Calgary for what was to be a two-road trip first investigation of Tooth Cave. The Tooth Cave complex is one of Canada's biggest caverns that slips underneath the world's surface. For the people who plan to investigate the cavern's legitimate gear and buckling experience is expected, as the area is perilous and suggested exclusively for experienced cavers. Harmed Tooth Cave was found in 1976. It is arranged among a different limestone complex and incorporates different caverns to investigate. For example, tooth to collapse window on the west, a primary entry of tooth, and a few others are too hazardous to even consider entering during the spring snowmelt. Emptying the snow out of above investigation of the cavern must be made throughout the fall because of the outrageous risk of water topping off inside the cavern. The water entering the cavern moves quick, making an ebb and flow that makes the cavern a passing snare for cave jumping. Regardless of whether you are in fact gifted from a carefully prepared cave wayfarer's perspective, it should be noticed that Tooth Cave is dull viruses drops and water perils. Huge rocks are known to break off the cavern walls, which can hit travelers and cause frightful wounds. The sharp shakes that sever from the walls can gauge large number of pounds. Getting over gear should be utilized in the cavern, however, the ropes anchors that go into the wall are in danger of dampening off. Prodding a stone fall beyond the cavern isn't protected either, as another gamble figure. The region is bare assaults. It is entirely expected to see a bear nearby, and you should know about them consistently. On Thursday, November 11, 2010, two individuals were safeguarded from Tooth Cave on a cold mountainside after in excess of 60 hunt and salvage staff worked during that time to save them. A man and a lady, both in their 20s, were harmed when one of them fell on top of the other while moving inside the cavern to arrive at the pair. The worker heroes needed to ascend 1.5 miles to 5 kilometers up the mountainside through shin-profound snow, and afterward sift through a frosty, tricky stone field to arrive at the opening, and afterwards slip into the cavern. Outdoorsman George Evanoff was from Ruler George, Canada. He is known for being a major event tracker, mountain dweller, cave pioneer, ski watch, pioneer ski guide, torrential slide expert, preservation advocate, tutor and trailblazer in ecotourism in Canada's rough mountains. George Evanoff comprehended the mountains and nature. He knew how to appreciate being there, and he enlivened others to a comparable mindfulness, empowering them to proceed with caution on the land. He did everything and is known as a legend locally. George is perhaps the earliest individual to investigate Tooth Cave and gave a large part of the known insights regarding the cavern. In 1998, George was out investigating closer Tooth Cave, English Columbia, when he coincidentally found a bear not long after killing a moose about a half-mile 800 meters from his lodge. George realized that he expected to escape that region and reduce most, if not all, connection with the bear. Tragically, mountain bears safeguard there. Kill, and George was a danger. The huge wild bear went after him, prompting his passing. George was chomped on the neck, yet he was not destroyed or eaten by the bear. His body was subsequently found by a hunt helicopter team relatively close to his lodge. Later, the mountain bear was found in the region, and it isn't known whether they chose to kill the bear that caused George's demise. George Evanoff's many distinctions incorporate naming Evanoff Commonplace Park in the McGregor Mountains, upper east of Sovereign George. The recreation area is arranged in the heartskopes of the Canadian Rockies. It gives a picturesque, effectively open objective for boondocks diversion. Two separate paths, the Fang Trail and the Prize Path, give admittance to the little elevated bowls with an association over Tooth Mountain. This spot is totally stunning. George took a significant number of the mysteries of Tooth Cave with him when he kicked the bucket, yet his memory will live on part of the way through the proceeded with investigation of the cavern. Mike Nash was an old buddy of George and they invested energy investigating the Ruler George region. Before George's passing, in the spring of 1981, George Evanoff and Mike Nash did a 4-day ski visit in Snow Cave, camp in the McGregor Mountains, English Columbia. One night around the pit fire, George enlightened Mike concerning a huge opening in the ground in the mountains right across the valley from where they were. Georgia had found this opening years sooner while hunting in the elevated region, which he called the Teeth, due to the unmistakable rough edge above. He had investigated a brief distance inside the entranceway, as had periodic trackers in the past. Still nobody had wandered far inside it since it immediately became specialized and extremely perilous. This spot is known to become Tooth Cave. Mike Nash's freshly discovered revenue in buckling drove him and George to investigate the cavern 2 months after the fact in June 1981. In September 1981, Mike's companion, Claudette, and 2 senior individuals from a snow-capped club headed to Ruler George for what was to be a 2-day starting investigation of the cavern. They previously investigated the resurgence, which is generally loaded up with water. Yet it didn't rain a lot of in the fall, so as of now, it was just to some extent topped later. Subsequent to setting off the camp in the high glades over the cavern, they investigated down from the primary entry during the principal evening. Mike and the 2 elevated club individuals got seriously derailed in the maze of the cavern. They had no clue about how to get out and overreacted on the grounds that they had restricted assets. On the off chance that they couldn't get out in this frenzy state, they turned out to be near plunging a cascade. For reasons unknown, they chose to hold off saving their lives. This cascade would have probably killed them. Assuming that they had endeavored it, was subsequently named Detachment Falls. As a result of that occurrence and a connected reviewing planning episode, they committed a few errors on that excursion, yet it was a learning illustration for Mike and his 2 companions. A month after the fact in 1981, George and Mike, joined by some accomplished climbing companions from Ruler George, got back to the cavern. They rappelled through the cavern's 3rd entry straightforwardly into what turned into Canada's 2nd biggest underground room, which they named the Stadium. From that point, they repulsed down the wine tool and turned into the principal people to stroll down the wide dynamic stream section, somewhere down in the cavern, that they named Sovereign's Display. This spot caused them to feel like they were on another planet. Mike Nash has 34 years of involvement in outside and boondocks entertainment. In Sovereign George, in northern English Columbia, he is an occupant of Ruler George and has been expounding on the area in bulletins, magazines, and local area papers for more than 10 years. Mike is likewise the writer of 4 other outside books. John Haber, a veteran climber and outdoorsman, is an expert forester and is an exceptionally achieved mountain dweller, rock and ice climber, backwoods explorer, skier, canoeer and whitewater beam. Since moving to Ruler George in 1996 with his better half, Catherine, he has filled in as the director of the Sovereign George section of the Snow-Capped Club of Canada, showed climbing and salvage courses, coordinated torrential slide mindfulness programs, and chipped in with a few sporting associations. He's done a ton to guarantee that he has the right stuff to take on Tooth Cave on the morning of October 17, 2009. John Haber, Mike Nash, and 2 other nearby individuals from the High Club entered Tooth Cave. By the center entry, they manipulated the entry into the stadium with a current bolt holder and camming gadget, utilizing a multiplied 9mm dynamic rope to slip. The first drop of the cavern cave segments happen when tapered rocks and stalagmites combine. They chose to utilize one of these huge sections at the top of the wine tool, which is a winding dry streamway, which turns out to be progressively vertical. As it drops, they manipulated a 11 mm dynamic rope for plummet. The lower part of the wind tool is more vertical and has a dreadful drop further down the cavern. A calming gadget was set in a break in the wall around 10 feet or 3 meters over an edge. Close to the highest point of this segment, a dissident and is made when you connect one rope to 2 anchors, and this was then placed in utilizing the calm so the other 2 individuals could plummet or rise simultaneously. While rising the wind tool, John saw that the cam had worked further into the break, so he set aside some margin to reposition it. He called down to the following individual from the party, and they started to dive tragically. When the climber put weight on the rope, the brake holding the calm opened up, causing 1,000-pound rock to come taking crazy. The stone fell onto John, pushing him to the edge and sticking him there in a 3-inch pool of water. The cabbers immediately moved past to John and made an honest effort to eliminate the weighty stone off of John's middle. He was oblivious in not breathing. They were some way or another ready to muscle the stone off of John gradually and cautiously. Then they had the option to resuscitate him, and he began to gradually recover cognizance. Anyway, he was experiencing issues breathing, and they dreaded he could have a spinal physical issue there. Wounds from the rockfall were crushing and dangerous. John had 7 broken ribs. His collarbone was broken in 2 spots, a fell lung, and his right shoulder was squashed alongside one of his fingers by the Goliath rock. This was by a long shot quite possibly of the most terrible injury he has at any point had, and he didn't know as of now. Assuming he would leave the cavern alive, Tamara Kostya was driving a cavern investigation with a gathering of 3 new cavers, and they entered the cavern through the center entry. She manipulated an alternate anchor, utilizing a static line that they had plummeted into the stadium. They arrived at the highest point of the wind tool and manipulated one more static line to slide. Tamara went down first and saw one of the snow-capped cave individuals coming out the elevated cavern part. Let Costa know that there was 3 additional down there, and they were coming up. However, it would be some time. She had no clue about that John had this horrendous mishap happen to him. Subsequent to conversing with the club part, Tamara saw that she needed more hardware to make a full plunge down that piece of the cavern, which would have driven her to John. Mike, another high part, Tamara, and the caver she was with continued back to the entry, and they planned to leave out of nowhere. The other high part that was with John and Mike had the option to advance up to the entry, and they told Tamara that John had got squashed by a stone. The snow-capped part likewise told Tamara that there was a satellite telephone at the entry, and that she could utilize it to call for help. Tamara, who's an exceptionally experienced caver, chose to return into the cavern to help John. She advanced toward him and immediately acknowledged he was in horrible shape. One of the new cavers that was with Tamara bounced on the satellite telephone and called 911 to the ruler, George Saar Salvage Administration, in the English Columbia Cave Salvage Association. They likewise set up a spot guide at the entry which would emit a sign for help to get whatever number heroes as could reasonably be expected. This is whenever the spot first reference point has, at any point, been utilized in the Sovereign George locale, so it grabbed everybody's eye search, and Salvage sent 2 helicopters to the site, and the heroes began chipping away at a plane to get John out of the cave. A helicopter needed to leave the scene in light of mechanical issues. Then a more strong helicopter was sent. In the territory was too steep to even consider dropping into, so the salvage teams were dropped in a knoll over the cavern, and afterward they had about a half-hour climb to get to the cavern entrance. As of now, the cavern was beginning to become busy. There was 9 salvage bunches, remembering cavers for the area, that caught wind of what was happening and chose to chip in there. Assistants Tamara had all additional dress that anybody had brought into the cavern site to help warm John up and make him as agreeable as conceivable, moving him out of that water and into a semi-sitting situation right now. John is still in the cavern, and he's passed out. Some were feeling that he was dead. He was having a seriously difficult time breathing, and the agony was excruciating. This cavern is likewise extremely specialized, so getting him out would have been a huge test. Also, John is exceptionally tall, so it's exceptionally difficult for them to place him in a cot. At last they had the option to get him into a cot, and the hero started moving him at around 8:15 p.m. There 2 or 3 places that they could move him around in light of the fact that the cot was so enormous. They previously needed to cut him down 3,000 feet to a salvage point before they could set him up appropriately to bring him out, and they were passing the cot starting with one individual, then onto the next to get him out. They were gaining a few headway, and the salvage group in the long run brought John up to the stadium at 9 p.m. right now. They actually looked at John's vitals and understood that his breathing was turning into somewhat better since they had the option to set up his head. At last John was raised to the center entry at 11:30 p.m. From that point, it was an additional 3 hours to pull him down the mountain to a place where the cot could then be stacked into a salvage helicopter. One of them. The hero said this was one of the nastiest cavern protects he's at any point been a piece of in his 27 years of search and salvage. The heroes experienced a few minor wounds, as well as one of the heroes had a stone fall on him causing swelling. What's more, others were cut by the sharp shakes inside the cavern. There are 2 primary sorts of ropes. Dynamic and static. Powerful ropes are intended to extend and retain the effect of a fallen climber. Static ropes stretch little, making them extremely productive in circumstances like bringing down a harmed climber or pulling a heap up. John, Mike, and the High Club individuals were in the cavern utilizing dynamic ropes anyway. The gathering had significant experience and had the funding accessible to utilize a legitimate static rope while the rising snow-capped parted repositioned the Ripley calm that was in the break. The stone's soundness was not seen to be compromised. This might have been expected just to the size of the stone, and that it very well may be essentially believed. Examination of the episode takes note of that more than once. Checking the gear of the cams and utilizing legitimate rope might have forestalled the mishap. John had the option to come to the clinic, and following 2 days he was out of escalated care and in stable condition. A sum of 52 heroes were involved, from ruler George Saar and outside clubs and BC Cave Salvage. Mike Nash composed a book about George Ebenos, reasoning towards the outside. The name of the book is The Mountain Knows No Master. George Evanoff, outdoorsman and contemporary legend, and I strongly suggest you look at this book. I read this book as a feature of the exploration for this story and was shocked when I was unable to put it down. Mike's other book, Open Air Well-Being and Endurance, is likewise a fundamental perused. I need to express gratitude for watching the video. Remember to buy in